night chose its witnesses the way a predator chose which throat to close its teeth around. It crept over Gable's hollow like a heavy hand, pressing down on the valley until even the fog seemed to flinch. Eli Hart walked beneath the leaning pines with a sense that the forest was tilting its head, listening to his footsteps as if deciding whether to welcome or swallow him. The old logging road stretched ahead in a bruised ribbon, thinning into darkness where the trees closed, ranks as though trying to hide whatever waited beyond. Folks around here don't share their stories with the world, only with the ones who understand what waits in the dark. It's why these tales find their way to whispering narratives. This valley keeps its warnings quiet, until the dead of night forces someone to speak, and the forest around Eli was ready to speak again. Eli hadn't planned to come this far. He'd only meant to scatter his father's ashes behind the house and leave Gable's hollow for good. But grief had a strange pull, and guilt had a stranger one. His father had died with Jonah's name on his lips, the same name that had haunted Eli since the night his brother vanished 20 years ago. He drove home because people returned to the place their ghosts never left. Now the forest felt charged, like it had been waiting for him to step over its threshold again. The last of the daylight drained into the ridges. The clouds shifted, and the moon behind them strained like a swollen eye under thinning skin. A cold wind slipped through the branches, brushing Eli's face with fingers colder than the season should allow. Every instinct told him to go back, but he took another step instead, boots sinking into soft layers of pine needles that muffled sound too well. The first howl rose before he had time to brace for it. It climbed from a deep wounded place, not the way a wolf called to its pack, but the way something cursed cried out when the night twisted in its gut. It rattled the branches overhead. Eli froze, breath caught in his throat. The sound stretched too long, trembling at the top as if the voice behind it couldn't decide whether to grieve or rage. Then a second howl cut across it, short, sharp, precise. It didn't waver. It didn't echo. It ended like a blade finding its sheath, clean and unhesitating. Two voices, two creatures, two claims over the same darkness. The forest held its breath. Eli held his dart. Then a human scream tore through the distance, high, panicked, and cut off mid-breath. The silence afterward was worse. Something out there was hunting, and something else was answering. Eli's pulse hammered. Its flashlight shook in his hand, beams sliding across trunks that looked too much like silhouettes. He backed up a step, then another, but the darkness behind him seemed thicker with every retreat, pressing in like a door he couldn't reopen. Some instinct older than fear pushed him forward instead, deeper into the woods, where the moonlight fractured across the branches in dangerous angles. He stumbled into a clearing that smelled of copper and wet earth. The moon broke free of the clouds, then too bright, too swollen its cold light, painting the clearing in silver streaks that made every shadow look deliberate. The smell hit him next, heavy, metallic, wrong, as if blood had seeped into this soil. Long before he arrived, beneath a leaning spruce, something crouched on all fours, its shoulders convulsed with sickening rhythm, skin rippled like boiling water, bones strained beneath it like something inside was trying to break out. Fingers clawed furrows in the mud as nails tore, black talons erupting underneath. Ribs widened, spine bulged, the jaw cracked outward, teeth pushing through, tearing flesh. A howl caught in its throat, not fully human, not fully animal. Transformation wasn't beautiful. It was violence inflicted from within. The creature's eyes flicked open, glowing with a silver fire that wasn't natural. For a heartbeat they flashed brown. Eli staggered back as his chest tightened. Jonah's eyes had been brown. The clearing spun, the world narrowed. No, he couldn't let that thought in. Couldn't let that possibility crawl under his skin. A branch snapped on the opposite side of the clearing. Something stepped out from the tree line. Tall, lean, upright, wrong-to detricorate leg. A narrow, muscular torso, arms too long for anything human. A canine skull where a man's face should be, snout glistening under the moonlight. Its eyes glowed yellow, not reflective, but emanating like twin lanterns lit deep in the sockets. The Dogman, Eli's father, used to whisper about them after too much whiskey. Cursed hunters, executioners of the woods, not protectors, forces of an older balance. He'd said they didn't chase the cursed, they finished them. But Dogman's gaze settled on Eli, cold, assessing a silent calculation Eli didn't want to understand. Then it looked at the writhing creature under the spruce. The werewolf rose, trembling, its transformation settling like a storm, finishing its collapse. Fur slick against widened shoulders, claws dripping mud, breath steaming in the cold air. Its silver eyes locked onto Eli again. This time, there was no brown beneath, only hunger sharpened into purpose. The two beasts stared at one another. Then, the Dogman moved at lunge with terrifying precision, and the clearing erupted into violence. The werewolf slashed upward, claws carving sparks from stone as it struck. The Dogman twisted aside, raking its hooked claws across the werewolf's flank, cutting deep. They collided again, rolling through the clearing like forces of nature, breaking loose from old restraints. Eli stumbled backward until his shoulder hit a cold trunk. His flashlight flickered, then died. He crouched instinctively, hands sinking into mud slick with blood old and new. Something metallic pressed against his palm. He dug around it, fingers scraping until he pulled out a rust-rimed rifle. Its wood chipped and darkened with age. Scratched into the stock were three faint letters: J.H. Jonah Hart. His brother had stood here with his gun, his initials cut into its wood. He had aimed at something Eli now saw with his own eyes, and we failed to return from this place. The creature slammed into a tree, cracking the trunk. Eli raised the rifle with trembling hands. The action grinded as he forced a cartridge into place. He didn't want to aim. He didn't want to choose which monster deserved a bullet. The Dogman tore into the werewolf's shoulder, fangs sinking deep. The werewolf roared a scream that shared no language with humanity. It twisted, claws raking across the Dogman's ribs, leaving deep, oozing slashes. The Dogman staggered, regained its stance, and lunged again. Eli fired. The shot ruptured, the clearing, scattering birds from unseen branches. Both creatures jerked. Blood sprayed onto the ground in steaming arcs. The Dogman swung toward Eli, lips curling back. Its yellow eyes narrowed not in rage, but in recognition. It sniffed once, inhaling the scent of rust and old grief clinging to the rifle. Its gaze rose to Eli's. Then it stepped back, letting the clearing decide what came next. The werewolf collapsed to one knee. Blood coursed down its side in dark streams. For a moment, the silver in its eyes flickered brown again, weak and pleading. Its claws sank into the mud, steadying a body that didn't know whether to fight or fall. The Dogman watched, muscles coiled, waiting. The werewolf lifted its head toward Eli. Something shuddered through it, something that sounded like Jonah's voice buried under layers of teeth and agony, a breath that used to be a word. Eli stepped forward, raising the rifle again, whispering the name he hadn't spoken to the night in 20 years. The werewolf blinked, brown surfacing briefly through the silver glow, a memory of humanity staring through a face that no longer had room for it. He fired. The body sagged. The clearing fell silent. The moon stared down without blinking. The Dogman dipped its head, a nod. A verdict met. A law upheld. Then it vanished into the tree line without a sound. Its departure so silent, Eli wondered if it had ever truly been there. Something rustled behind Eli. A stray dog, ribs visible beneath patchy fur, watched him from the shadows with cautious green eyes. It sniffed the air, then stepped closer, as if sensing the same loss the earth beneath him held. When Eli walked, it followed, paws patting softly along the fallen needles. Together they left the clearing behind. Even miles away, the smell of blood clung to him like a second shadow. And the deeper he walked back toward the edge of the woods, the more he felt the night following close behind him, listening to each step the way a patient predator listened for the weakening of prey. The stray dog kept glancing into the trees, as though expecting something to emerge at any moment. Every rustle of leaves made it flinch. Every snap of a distant branch made Eli's throat tighten. He knew better than to look back. People who survived the North Woods learned not to check if the dark was watching, because it always was. Instead he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, though his legs felt hollow and his breath stuttered in shallow gasps. His hands still shook around the rifle, the old woodworm from his grip, the initials carved into it, pressing against his palm like a bruise he'd earned long before picking it up. When the farmhouse reappeared through the thinning line of trees, a sagging silhouette under the sickle of the rising moon, Eli stopped walking without meaning to. His lungs seized in a sharp, aching breath. The house looked smaller than it had when he left the valley years ago. Its paint peeling, its windows black, the front steps swollen with rain, but it carried a weight he recognized, a grief that had never left, a shape he'd walked away from, but had never really escaped. The dog brushed against his leg, urging him forward. He crossed the last stretch of overgrown grass and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under his boots like an old memory waking in sighs. The air was cold and stale. faintly tinged with mold and dust and the scent of a life that had ended. Slowly, he set the rifle on the kitchen table. The stray hopped onto a chair, curling itself with a soft grunt. Eli sank into the seat across from it, hands trembling so badly he had to clasp them together to keep them still. The room felt too quiet, too listening. His mind replayed flashes from the clearing in stuttering fragments, silver eyes flickering brown, claws gouging mud, the crack of bone, the cold precision of the Dogman, and the soft collapsing sound when the werewolf's body finally let go. Jonah had been alone when it took him, alone when he changed, alone when something else came for him. And Eli, too late by decades, had been the one to end him. The thought strangled something inside his chest. His father's voice drifted back through memory, a late-night whisper through whiskey breath. The cursed never lasts long out there. Something comes for them, not to save them, to finish him. Eli perceived both palms to his face as if he could scrub the memory away. But the sounds wouldn't stop those two howls, one long and broken, one short and commanding. He had heard them as a child and convinced himself they were wind or coyotes. He had heard them again the night Jonah vanished and believed the grown men who said accidents happen in the woods. But he understood now. There were two hunters in Gable's Hollow, one born of pain and transformation, one born to correct it. The night outside shifted. A breeze scraped the siding like fingers dragging across old wood. Eli rose from the chair, checked the locks out of habit and fear, then paused at the back door. A muddy print, too long, too narrow, too clod-stained. The step outside. His breath hitched. He knelt, tracing the edge of it with the tip of his finger. It was faint, as if something only half-formed had passed through, fresh but not fresh enough to steam in the cold air. He recognized it from the clearing. The Dogman had been here, not to stalk him, not to threaten, not to make sure the story was finished. The stray dog whined softly from the kitchen. Eli backed inside, locking the door with a double click. He returned to the table, staring at the rifle. The last time he had held something that heavy, he and Jonah had been hunting deer behind the ridge, laughing when Eli tripped over a fallen branch. Jonah had grabbed his arm to steady him, saying in that easy, teasing voice, "Don't tell Dad, he'll think you ain't got bones." The memory cracked something open in him. He covered his eyes with one hand, jaw clenched against a sound he didn't want to make. The night didn't comfort him. It never had. A distant howl rose through the hills, long, trembling, grieving, but not close. Not here. Another followed, shorter, cutting through the first. Eli stood still, letting the two voices tangle through the valley. One sounded like a creature calling out for something it lost. The other sounded like the night enforcing its old laws. He whispered into the darkness, "Jonah, I'm sorry." The dog lifted its head, ears turning toward him. Eli reached over and stroked its scarred muzzle. The dog pressed into his hand, with a shiver, as if it understood loss better than any human could. He slept only in fragments that night, drifting in and out of shadowed dreams. When dawn finally slipped into the kitchen with a thin strip of light, he felt older than the house around him. He needed answers. Answers his father had taken to the grave. Answers the sheriff had drowned in long silences. Answers the town had buried under warnings, disguised as folklore. He drove into Gable's Hollow with a rifle in the back seat. The stray dog curled on the passenger floorboard. The town was awake but not lively. People moved in practiced pause, avoiding certain streets, certain directions. Conversations died when Eli walked by. Eyes followed him with a mix of pity and fear of the thing he'd seen, or fear of the thing that might now be following him. He found the sheriff outside the hardware store, loading salt into the back of his truck. The man looked older, the lines on his face carved deeper than Eli remembered. When he saw Eli, he paused mid-lit. "You went in?" he said quietly. Eli nodded. "And you came back?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Not everyone does." Eli didn't bother sitting. "Jonah, I know," the sheriff cut in, voice cracking just enough to betray memory. "We found prints that night. Two kinds. You know what that means?" "I didn't," Eli said, though his voice felt thin. "Not until last night." The sheriff's eyes softened with the grief of someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. "I tried to warn your father. Told him those woods weren't meant for folks anymore. Told him something out there was wrong, and something else was trying to make it right." Eli barked out a humorless laugh. "It killed him. It spared him," the sheriff replied. "You ever think about that? Jonah weren't a killer. He weren't a monster. He was cursed, and curses don't die easy. They tear through other people first. But the Dogman, those things don't let the curse spread. They don't let him turn, they finish it. You can hate them all you want, but without them, This valley'd be a graveyard. Eli swallowed hard, jaw tight. Why didn't you tell me? What good would it have done? The sheriff leaned on the tailgate, tired. You were a kid, and the truth don't save people. It just scars them ahead of time. Eli looked away toward the ridge, where the woods began again. The sheriff followed his gaze. Feels different now, don't it? He murmured. Like the trees are waiting, like the night's thinking. That means something shifted in there. Something ended. Something else began. The stray dog barked from inside the truck, a sharp sound that made both men turn. Eli nodded once, understanding threaded through the dread curling in his gut. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked back to the truck, climbing in as the sheriff called after him. If you hear him again to howls, don't go looking. Let the night keep its own business. Back at the Hart farm, the porch boards creaked as if greeting him with old bone. The stray leapt out first, circling the yard, nose low to the ground. Eli followed, scanning the tree line. It felt wrong again. Not dangerous. Watch and instinct alone made him lift his eyes toward the ridge. A silhouette stood just inside the tree line, too tall for a man, too still to be anything natural. Yellow eyes blinked once. Eli froze. The dogman didn't step forward, didn't snarl, didn't vanish. It only stared, as if waiting, as if deciding what Eli had become. It held his gaze so long his eyes began to water. At that distance, in that light, the dogman looked carved out of the same dark that pooled between the trees. Shoulders rolled forward, head slightly tilted, ears pricked like it was listening. Two more than his heartbeat. Eli felt like he was standing in front of a mirror that didn't reflect his shape, only the weight of what he'd done. The stray dog trotted between them, tail low, hackles raised, a faint rumble in its chest. It planted itself in front of Eli's leg as if it could shield him from something that could rip it in half without slowing down. The gesture was ridiculous and somehow unbearably sad. Eli lifted a hand, not quite a wave, more a twitch that said, "I see you." The dogman's nostrils flared, inhaling whatever scent lived in the air between farmhouse and forest. Something like acknowledgement flickered across its predatory face. Then, without fanfare, it turned and stepped deeper into the trees, swallowed by shadow as easily as breath. It hadn't come to finish him. Not yet. Night after night, Eli found sleep harder to keep. Every time he closed his eyes, the clearing replayed in ugly detail the way Jonah's eyes had flickered through the werewolf's face. The strain in those lengthening bones, the crushing inevitability in the dogman's movements. He started leaving a lamp on in the kitchen, another in the hall. The stray stayed close, shadowing him room to room with restless energy, as if it too could feel something under the floorboards shifting whenever the moon grew brighter. The second week after Jonah's end, the town began to talk again. Not to him. Round him. In the grocery store, two old women at the canned goods aisle shook their heads over a headline from the county paper. Hunter found mutilated near county line. What? Muttered that they'd told people not to bring outsiders into the old woods. The otter glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice. Tracks didn't match, they said. Same as back then. At the gas station, a trucker griped about losing a load because he refused to drive the ridge at night. Some things bigger than me are out there, he said, tapping his chest with two fingers. You feel it, like somebody's staring through you just to see what's behind. At the bar, late enough that no one bothered pretending the world made sense, Eli overheard a story about a family that had moved away abruptly after something. Kept circling their property on 3 consecutive full moons. You hear 2 different howls in one night, the man said, eyes on his drink. That's not a warning, that's a count. Pieces of the valley's private language fell into place. The way people paused when someone mentioned the North Woods. The way they glanced up at the sky, judging how much moonlight the night would offer. The way they talked about bad years, not by weather or crops, but by how many times the sirens went toward the woods instead of the highway. The hot name, always mixed with pity and resentment since Jonah vanished, now drew a different sort of look. Not just sympathy, not just blame. Expectation. Eli tried to ignore it. He put himself to practical tasks, fixing the fence, patching holes in the roof, clearing out his father's hoarded junk. Every cracked board he replaced felt like an apology laid over a wound that wouldn't close. The stray followed him everywhere, answering only to a name he never knew who spoke first. Shade. Too obvious maybe, but fitting. The dog seemed to slip in and out of sight without moving, always where the dark was deepest. One night, as he sat at the kitchen table going through a box of old papers, he found a weathered notebook. with his father's cramped writing across the cover. Tracks, dates, moon. He opened it cautiously. Inside, each page held a date, a rough sketch of a paw print or footprint, a list of locations, and notes. Sometimes, just single words. Howl, scream, Dogman. Other times phrases. Saw silver. Sheriff says, leave it. Won't the pattern chilled him. Every time there was a cluster of sightings. A few nights later someone went missing, sometimes a hunter, sometimes a drifter. Occasionally a name he recognized from school or church. On the last page his father had written before death took his hand away. There were only 3 words and a shaky line beneath them. It's back again. The date was 3 weeks before Eli returned. He pushed the notebook away as if it might burn him. Shade wind under the table, laying its head on his boot. Eli leaned down, fingers sliding behind its ragged ear. You knew, didn't you? He murmured, not expecting an answer. Everybody knew but me. Outside, an owl called once, sharp and solitary. The house creaked as it settled into the cold. Somewhere far off, in the direction of the ridge, something gave voice to a low, wavering howl. Eli stiffened, counting. 1. He waited. Silence rolled in like fog between hills. He almost convinced himself it had been some dog in a neighboring hollow, lost and crying to nobody. Then the second sound came, short, hard-edged, ending before his brain had fully processed the start of it too. His skin crawled, Shade bolted up, nails scrabbling on the worn linoleum. The dog stared toward the back door, ears flattened, throat rumbling. Eli stood slowly, heart climbing into his throat. The rifle leaned where he'd left it by the doorway. He grabbed it without conscious thought. He walked to the porch. Every step too loud. The air outside hit colder than it had any right to. The kind of cold that smelled of rock and deep spaces where light did not reach. The moon wasn't full, but it was bright enough to reveal the yard, the stone wall at the back, the first line of trees beyond. Nothing moved. He listened. Breath shallow, every muscle ready to explode. The only sound was Shade's low growl at his ankle. Then he saw them dot at the far edge of the yard. Just before the stone wall, the grass lay pressed down in 2 distinct paths. One line of impressions, broad, heavy, four-toed, with deep claw marks, led from the right, hugging the tree line. The other set, narrower, long-toed, almost hand-light, came in from the left. They met just beyond the wall, then both vanished toward the woods. His father's notebook flashed through his mind. 2 kinds every time. The cursed and the cleaner. Eli swallowed. Not tonight, he whispered hoarsely, not sure who he was begging. The moony. Whatever part of Jonah might still echo in the soil. But the night didn't run on pleas. It ran on patterns. And the pattern in Gable's hollow had never cared who was ready. The next day, word spread like mold on bread. A boy from town hadn't come home, 16 years old, last seen near the creek that fed the south side of the valley. His mother pinned missing posters in places her son would never see them. People looked toward the woods with tight mouths and haunted eyes. At the bar that evening, Eli sat alone, nursing a beer he didn't want. Voices murmured around him, too low for words but loud enough to feel. The television played some distant game no one really watched. The door creaked open. The sheriff came in, shoulders sagging. He didn't order a drink. He walked straight to Eli's table. Southwoods this time, he said quietly. Prints, again. 2 kinds. Boys. Hat near the bend. Lot of blood. Not enough body. Eli stared at the ring of condensation his glass had left on the table. You want me to say something? Do something? The sheriff sure worked. I want you to understand the timing. Whatever happened in the north corner with you and your brother. He lowered his voice further. That wasn't the end. Curses don't belong to one family. They hitch rides. They spread. Dogman follows them because something has to. Eli's stomach twisted. And you think this plays another bullet. I think the night took something from you and turned you into something it uses, the sheriff said, eyes tired but unflinching. You walked out when most don't. Sometimes that's not survival. He held Eli's gaze. Sometimes that's recruitment. The word tasted foul. Eli pushed his drink away. I'm not your executioner. Neither is he. The sheriff nodded toward the woods visible in the bar's side window, as if the dogman waited just beyond the glass. But he does it anyway. Because the alternative is worse, he sighed. We'll drag the creek. We'll call the county. We'll write up another sad story about animals and accidents. But you and I know better. We don't cut this off. That list in your daddy's notebook gets longer. Eli drove home with the road weaving slightly under his tires, not from drink but from the weight of what the sheriff had hung on his shoulders. The valley seemed to lean in from either side, as if listening to what he'd decide. Shade paced in the truck bed, turned in circles, like it knew they were moving toward something hard and ugly at the farm. Midnight stretched thin and brittle. The trees on the ridge stood like dark witnesses. The moon's light washed color from everything, leaving only bone white and shadow black. Eli sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees, notebook open beside him. Names stared back at him, from old ink, each paired with a date, a phase of the moon, and eventually 2 words: not found. Yona's page had no note, just a final, unfinished line from his father's pen, the one that said he's back again. Maybe he wasn't talking about Jonah at all, Eli muttered, voice cracking in the empty yard. Maybe he meant the curse. Shade pressed against his side, warm and trembling. Eli stared toward the gap in the tree line where he'd seen the Dogman earlier. "If you wanted me dead," he said softly to the duck, "you'd have done it already." The night did not answer, but somewhere, beyond the ridge, something howled. One long, broken note. Then, inevitably an answering cut, short, sharp, 2. Eli rose, before he knew he'd made the decision, the rifle hanging from his hand, the cold scraping his skin like he wanted to carve its way inside. Shade trotted beside him as he crossed the yard, each crunch of frost underfoot louder than it should have been. The world felt thinned out, stretched too tight, as if the veil between what lived under the trees and what lived above them had worn dangerously thin. He reached the stone wall at the back of the property and climbed over it. The moon cast a path across the tall grass. A pale corridor pointed straight toward the south woods where the missing boy had last been seen. Shade hesitated, whining low, then followed, tail tucked tight. Eli couldn't hear his own heartbeat anymore, only the tremor of something waiting ahead. The woods swallowed him, as they always had, as if the trees remembered the shape of him. He moved quietly, stepping where the ground dipped, weaving between brambles without touching them. Jonah had once taught him how to walk like that, how to blend into the forest without letting it know you were there. Eli hated remembering that lesson now. They hated how instinctively it came back. Shade sniffed the air, body stiffening with every new scent carried on the wind. After 20 minutes, Eli crouched. Mud, blood, drag marks through the ferns. He ran his fingers through the disturbed soil. Still damp, still warm. Shade growled, staring into the thicker darkness ahead. The sound wasn't loud, but it was steady, the kind of growl dogs make when they've already decided something is wrong enough to fight. Eli crept forward, through a narrow choke of young pines, and found himself in a shallow ravine cut by an old stream. The water was barely moving, trickling over stones slick with moss, but something heavy had been here recently. The mud bore impressions so deep they had filled with water. He traced one with numb fingers, 4 toes, wide pad, claws like hooked blades. Werewolf. Beside them, overlapping in places like a hunt, the other prints. Long toes, narrow heel, weight balance. Dogman. 2 kinds again. But this time, they weren't fighting, they were following something else. Eli's chest tightened. He scanned the ravine, searching for anything that might explain why both predators had come this way. Then he saw it, caught against a fallen limb, half submerged in the water. A piece of torn fabric floated softly in the current. He stepped down, lifted it, and felt his stomach drop. A flannel sleeve. Red and black, the same pattern the missing boy had been wearing when his mother passed around the photo. Blood darkened the cloth near the shoulder. Eli swallowed hard, trying to steady the world tilting around him. "Please," he whispered to no one. "Not another kid. Not another one." Shade barked sharply, the sound echoing up the ravine walls. Eli turned, rifle raised. A branch snapped somewhere ahead, followed by a labored grunt where it staggered. Then the unmistakable roll of a low growl, too deep to come from any human throat. Eli's breath clouded in front of him. He moved toward the sound. Shade stayed at his heels, muscles taut, ready to spring or flee. The ravine narrowed further before opening into a clearing where the moon poured down in a cold sheet of silver. The remains of an old hunting cabin leaned near the far edge, half collapsed, its roof bowing inward like an exhausted spine. Eli stepped slowly into the clearing. Something moved behind the broken cabin. A scraping, dragging sound, punctuated by choked breaths. Eli tightened his grip on the rifle. Shade growled again, low and trembling. He wasn't prepared for what stepped out. It emerged on 2 legs first, staggering, hunched forward as if its spine were fighting itself. One arm dragged behind it, claws gouging the dirt. The other convulsed. as bone twisted under skin, bulging in grotesque pulses. Its face flickered between human lines and something lupin jaw wrenched open too wide, teeth too long to belong in a human skull. The missing boy, partway changed. The curse had taken him, but not fully. His real eyes flickered behind the transformation. Drowning under terror, he tried to speak. The sound came out as a rasp and a whine tangled together. "No," Eli breathed, stepping forward as Shade whimpered. The boy's body convulsed. A horrible tearing sound followed as fur erupted along his arm, shredding skin. His spine arched violently, vertebrae cracking like brittle sticks. His mouth opened on a scream that morphed mid-air into a howl, but it wasn't the full howl of a turned werewolf. It was the first note of becoming. The night hummed with pressure, as if even the air recoiled from the sound. Then another noise split. The clearing. A rustle. A shift. A second presence. Eli turned sharply, rifle snapping upward. Though he already knew what he'd see, the Dogman stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadow. It moved forward slowly, deliberately, as though every step was part of a ritual. Its eyes glowed with the same terrible calm he'd seen weeks ago, the same cold certainty that came before judgment. The cursed child howled weakly, head snapping toward the new arrival. Fear rippled through the boy's half-changed body. He stumbled backward, trying to keep distance between himself and the Dogman, but his limbs bent wrong, his muscles twitching uncontrollably. Eli stepped between them without thinking. The Dogman halted. Shade barked. Hackles raised. The transformed boy whimpered an awful, shuddering sound. Eli raised the rifle at the Dogman, breath ragged. "No, not yet. He's still in there." The Dogman tilted its head, as if questioning whether Eli truly understood the nature of the thing standing behind him. The boy convulsed again, bones cracking violently. His legs bent backward with a moist pop. His jaw distended further. His fingers curled into claws that dragged across the dirt in frantic, involuntary scrapes. Eli turned toward him. Hold, unjust, look at me." The boy's eyes flickered human for a heartbeat. Then the silver swallowed them whole. He lunged, not at the Dogman. At Eli. Shade leaped, intercepting the boy in midair, teeth sinking into his forearm. The boy shrieked, flinging the dog aside with monstrous strength. Eli fired blindly, the rifle's recoil slamming into his shoulder. The bullet grazed the boy's ribs, spinning him sideways but not stopping him. He hit the dirt, scrambled up, and charged again, movements jerky and violent, muscles swelling and tearing as the transformation accelerated. The Dogman moved. It crossed the clearing with impossible speed, crashing into the transforming boy with enough force to shake the ground. The two rolled through the dirt, snarling and howling. Claws flashed, flesh tore, blood sprayed in hot arcs across the moonlit ground. Eli scrambled toward Shade, dragging the injured dog behind a stump. Shade whimpered but nudged Eli's hand, as if urging him to watch. The Dogman fought with brutal certainty, pinning the boy's limbs, ripping tendons that would never heal. The boy's howls turned frantic, animal panic drowning his human voice. The Dogman's jaws closed around the boy's throat, not killing him immediately, but holding him suspended between life and death, forcing the curse into stillness. The boy convulsed violently. One final surge of strength. A disparate, broken sound escaped him, half scream, half word. Eli staggered forward. "Stop, he's just a kid." The Dogman looked at him, not with cruelty, with duty, and slowly, deliberately, crushed the boy's throat. The body went limp. Eli fell to his knees, hands shaking, breath shredded in his lungs. He cradled his head in his palms, tears hot against the cold air. Shade crawled to his side, pressing against him with trembling warmth. The Dogman stood over the fallen boy for a long moment, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then it backed away, releasing the body carefully, as though laying him down rather than discarding him. Its eyes lifted to Eli. A warning, a truth, a burden. Then it disappeared into the trees. Eli knelt in the clearing long after the night swallowed the Dogman, long after the boy's warmth faded, long after the moon climbed high enough to bleach every shadow into groused howl. When he finally rose, Shade at his side, he whispered into the cold air, "How many more?" No one answered, but the trees listened, and something in the ridge exhaled, like a creature that had been holding its breath for years, finally preparing to move again. As Eli carried the boy's body from the clearing, the weight felt wrong, not because it was heavy, but because it felt like carrying two lives at once. The child who'd lived, and the creature he never got a chance to stop becoming. Shade limped behind him, favoring its bitten leg, but refusing to fall back. The forest trailed them like a shadow that didn't know how to detach. The moon, pale and thinned by altitude, leaned through the branches as though watching his every step. When Eli reached the creek where the ravine met open ground, he laid the boy gently against the flat stones. The cold water brushed against torn fur and exposed skin, washing away blood that had never belonged to him in the first place. Eli wanted to give him words, apologies, prayers, anything, but his throat felt like gravel, dry and aching. Shade stood vigil, trembling but alert, ears swiveling toward every sound the woods offered. A low wind drifted through the clearing, carrying something faint and sour beneath the scent of pine. Eli stiffened. It wasn't the smell of the dead boy. It was older, more metallic, more wrong. Shade recognized it first. Its hackles rose in a jagged line along its back, and a rumble churned in its chest. Something else had been here before them. Eli lifted his head slowly. Across the creek, in the tall reeds, the grass lay pressed flat in a wide radius, as if something massive had crouched there, waiting. Deep, irregular scratches scored the stone, as though claws had tried and failed to grip it. A single drop of dark, almost black blood shone on a leaf. He didn't know whether it belonged to the Dogman or the cursed child or something else entirely. He didn't want to. Shade nudged his ankle gently, urging him away. Eli hesitated only a moment before lifting the boy into his arms again. He carried him until the clearing thinned into the open field behind an abandoned barn. There, beneath the old oak tree where the ground was soft and the earth forgiving, he dug a grave with his bare hands. It took him nearly 2 hours, his palms raw and torn, his breath fogging in the cold night. When he finished, he placed the boy's torn flannel over the mound and whispered the name the missing posters carried. Shade lay down beside it, head bowed, tail curled inward. For a long moment, the two of them watched the forest, waiting for the Dogman to appear again, to claim whatever ritual it had begun. But the tree line remained still. Silence pressed its palm over the valley, tight and heavy. Eli walked home with Shade limping behind him, the moon following overhead like a pale eye that had learned too much. Over the next days, the valley changed. Small things at first. Livestock slaughtered on opposite ends of the hollow, carcasses torn open with the same distinct cruelty. Doors found clawed in the early morning. Children waking in the night, swearing they'd heard something whisper outside their windows. Old men sitting on porches until dawn with shotguns across their laps, muttering that the air felt wrong, that the woods were moving too much, too quiet, too alive. Then always those mismatched howls, one long and grieving, one sharp and commanding dot, sometimes only minutes apart, sometimes layered, as if one hunted the echo of the other. Eli stopped going into town. People stared at him with a mix of reverence and fear, like he'd been marked by something ancient and dangerous. And maybe he didn't feel like himself anymore. He slept less, he listened more, he caught movements at the edge of the fields that disappeared when he blinked. Sometimes at night he felt a presence near the farmhouse porch watching him through the slats, leaving behind clawed impressions in the dirt that were gone by morning. Shade slept at the foot of his bed now. Some nights the dog whimpered in its dreams, paws twitching as though running. Eli would wake to the sound and place a hand on its back until it calmed, both of them pretending the dark wasn't listening. But the ridge was listening. The ridge was always listening. One evening, while the sun bled red across the far hills, Eli walked to the stone wall and found something perched on top of it. At first glance, it looked like an animal's skull, long jaw, sharp teeth, hollow eye sockets, but as he stepped closer, the truth chilled him. It wasn't a skull, it was a mask of hardened bark and bone fragments, lashed together with sinew and hair. A symbol, a warning, a message. Shade barked sharply and backpedaled. Tail tucked. Eli didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He recognized it from old drawings in his father's notebook. A dogman's mark, a sign placed where a battle line had been drawn, not for territory, for duty. His father had called them cleaners, executioners of the cursed. But the notebook had hinted at something else, something Jonah hadn't lived long enough to explain. The Dogman didn't just track the cursed, it tracked whoever stood between the cursed and the wood's old laws. Eli felt the truth settle into his bones with unwelcome clarity. It wasn't marking the forest, it was marking him. The night crawled in early. Shadows stretched long across the yard as if trying to touch the farmhouse even before the sun finished dying. Eli sat on the porch steps, rifle beside him. Shade curled close, both staring toward the woods where the mask glinted faintly in the fading light. A breeze rose, carrying with it the faintest sound, A breathless step, a low, deliberate growl, then a scream, a human one. High. Ah! Closed. Eli bolted upright. Shade lunged forward, barking wildly. The scream came again, choked, desperate, ending in wet silence. Eli grabbed the rifle and ran toward the trees, legs moving before sense could catch. Opt! The world blurred. The grass tore under his boots. Branches whipped against his arms as he plunged into the forest. The smell hit him before the scythe. Blood. Fresh. Hot. Thick in the air. Shade snarled behind him. Eli reached a clearing lit by the rising moon and stopped dead. Something lay in the center of the clearing. Something that had once been human. He recognized the jacket on the shredded torso. A man from the gas station. A drifter. Someone passing through. Claw marks crossed the body in long, violent arcs, wide-curved, ragged, werewolf marks. But beside those, cutting deeper, cleaner, more surgical Dogman marks too. Killers in the same space. But they hadn't fought each other. They'd hunted the same prey. Eli's stomach clenched. No, not this, not. Both. Not at once. Shade growled, ears swiveling. Something massive shifted in the darkness to Eli's right. Then something else shifted to his left. He was no longer alone in the clearing. He was between two predators again. Except this time, neither was wounded, neither was hesitant, neither was holding back for him. The force exhaled. The night leaned in. Two shapes emerged from the shadows. Step by deliberate step. And Eli understood, with a coldness deeper than fear, that the curse spreading through Gable's hollow had reached a tipping point. The Dogman wasn't here to clean anymore. It was here to finish what the valley had begun. And the werewolf beside it wasn't the haunted, half-broken creature he'd known in the northern clearing. This one was whole. This one was hungry. This one knew he'd killed its kind. Eli lifted the rifle, breath shaking, heart hammering like it wanted to escape his chest. Shay stood in front of him, small and shaking but refusing to move aside. The werewolf growled. The Dogman breathed. The trees listened, and Eli Hart understood. In the cold clarity, before violence, that the night had decided something. It wasn't done with him, not even close. The werewolf took a single step forward, and the whole clearing seemed to shrink around it. Its fur caught the moonlight like wet wire, silver-streaked with old scars. Muscles rolled under its skin in thick ropes, each movement precise in its brutality. Its eyes burned with a cold, feral hatred that felt almost personal. Eli could feel it, like a weight pressing against his ribs. The Dogman stepped out beside it, not behind, not ahead, beside. For the first time, seeing them together in full, Eli understood why the valley told stories in half-truths and broken metaphors. To describe them plainly would be to admit that the old hierarchy of predator and prey had been ripped apart. One was cursed, one was created. Neither answered to anything human. The corpse between them might as well have been a line etched into the ground. The werewolf's lips lifted, revealing teeth that were too long, too many. It rumbled deep in its chest, not a bark, not a snarl, but something that spoke of territorial claim. The Dogman turned its head slightly, yellow eyes narrowing, listening to a language spoken in growls and howls and the tension in the air. Eli's throat went dry. Shade barked once, then fell silent, as if realizing sound might push the balance toward violence. The rifle felt too small in Eli's hands now, like a toy someone had placed there to keep him from realizing he was unarmed. The werewolf's gaze snapped to him. Recognition burned in it, not of his face, but of what he'd done. He'd killed one of its kind, ended a curse, broken a chain the forest had been feeding on. The Dogman looked at him too. Between the two gazes, Eli felt flayed. Every fear, every guilt, every choice laid bare. The woods behind them seemed to draw tighter, trees leaning inward as though the entire ridge was waiting to see what he'd do next. He did the only thing he could. He lowered the rifle. Shade wind. Confused. The werewolf's growl deepened, hackles rising. It took another step forward, claws carving lines into the earth. The Dogman shifted its weight, as if deciding whether to intervene. Eli lifted his empty hand, palm out, a gesture of surrender older than language. "I'm done shooting you," he said softly, voice shaking. "All of you." It didn't fix anything, did it? Just made the night hungrier. The werewolf's ears twitched. Its head tilted a fraction, as if trying to pass meaning from tone. Its nostrils flared, inhaling a scent, fear, sorrow, exhaustion, that old stain of hard blood and Jonah's ghost. The Dogman took one measured step closer. Its claws flexed, sinking into the dirt with slow deliberation. Closer now. Eli could see old scars crisscrossing its forearms and chest, layers of healed violence. This thing had been fighting longer than his family had owned land in this valley. Eli swallowed. "You clean because you have to," he murmured, more to himself than to them, and they nodded toward the werewolf. "They tear because they can't help it." In the valley, just his voice cracked. "Just keeps feeding you both." The wind shifted. For a moment, the clearing filled with the smell of whetstone and old leaves, a scent that had nothing to do with blood. The werewolf's muscles tensed as if preparing to leap. The dogman's shoulders rolled, ready to intercept. Eli realized, with a clarity so sharp it hurt, that this wasn't about him surviving. It was about what he became if he did. Slowly, deliberately, he turned and walked to the edge of the clearing. Shade stayed glued to his side. He laid the rifle down on a flat rock, the metal clicking softly against stone. He took a step back, then another, until there was nothing between him and the two monsters but air and moonlight. "If you're going to finish it," he said, voice barely stronger than a whisper, "then finish me. If not," he nodded once, toward the corpse on the ground, toward the woods beyond, "then you already know what I am, what I've done, and you know I won't look away anymore." The werewolf's breath rasped in and out, each exhale a visible plume in the cold. The dogman's chest rose and fell more slowly, controlled. Both stared at him. The forest held its breath. Then, the dogman moved, not toward Eli, toward the body. It stepped over the mangled corpse, sniffed once, then lowered its head in something that looked uncomfortably like respect. It glanced at the werewolf, a flick of its ears, a shift of its shoulders. The werewolf huffed, a sound that might have been agreement, might have been annoyance. It turned away from Eli, pacing in a tight circle as if the urge to tear something apart had nowhere to go. The dogman looked at Eli one last time. In that gaze, he read a message he could not translate into words. Not forgiveness, not threat, not gratitude, not recognition. Then without ceremony the dogman melted back into the trees. The werewolf lingered a heartbeat longer, silver eyes reflecting the moon in shards. It lifted its muzzle and let out a howl that climbed the sky like a broken prayer, long and jagged and full of every hunger the valley had ever tried to bury. Somewhere, distantly, another howl answered. Then it too was gone. Eli stood alone in the clearing with a cooling body and a dog that shook like its bones were rattling apart. The night didn't feel any safer for sparing him. He buried the drift remains near the edge of the woods where the soil turned dark and rich. He marked the grave with a stone pulled from the creek, hands raw from digging. Shade watched him with solemn eyes, occasionally sniffing the air as if expecting teeth to appear in the dark when he was done. Eli sat beside the stone, back against a tree, legs too empty to carry him yet. The moon had climbed high by then, bleaching the world in stark contrasts. Every sound felt louder in its light, the creak of branches, the distant rush of the creek, the soft shuffle of unseen animals moving where they shouldn't. He thought of his father's notebook, of the list of names, of Jonah's unfinished line, of the boy he'd shot, of the boy the dogman had finished, of the man in the gas station jacket torn apart by two sets of claws. He realized the pattern had changed. Two kinds of tracks. But now, three roles. The cursed, the cleaner, the witness. Shade nudged his hand with a damp nose. Eli stroked its scarred ear, the rhythm grounding him in a way nothing else did now. "You picked the wrong man to follow home," he murmured. Shade huffed softly, as if to disagree. The valley did not sleep. Night after night, the sounds continued, the grieving howl and its sharp counterpart. But something in their rhythm shifted. Where before they'd come close, circling the Hart farm, now they drifted wider. Farther along the ridges, deeper into the folds of the hills. Stories in town changed too. Folks still whispered about missing livestock and strange tracks. But the human names slowed, not stopped, never stopped, just slowed. Eli walked the property lines every evening, a ritual he hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon. Shade trotted beside him, occasionally veering off to sniff where the air felt thick. Some mornings he awoke to find clawed footprints in the muddy patches near the stone wall. Sometimes they were wide and heavy, sometimes narrow and long, sometimes both. Once, he found something else. A killed deer left neatly inside the yard, untouched except for a single bite taken from its throat. The wound was clean, no tearing, no pageant. Eli stared at it for a long time. Shade sniffed the air, then stepped back, tail low. He didn't know if it was a warning, a gift, or a message. He buried the deer anyway, Lives in Gable's Hollow went on. People still went missing sometimes. Hunters still told stories, half in jest, half in warning. Teenagers still dared each other to drive to the end of the North Road and turn their headlights off. But gradually, the town's gaze shifted whenever Eli walked by. Not just pity, not just fear. Something closer to reliance. At first he resented it. He was no sheriff, no priest, no hero. Just a man who'd failed to save his brother and had been thrust into the aftermath. But on the nights when the howls came too close, when the air vibrated with the promise of something tearing free of its last restraint, he would pick up the rifle and stand on the porch, not aiming at the woods, aiming at the house, at the town beyond, at the line he'd silently agreed to hold. He understood, in those hours, why the Dogman fought the way it did, not with hate. With obligation, there were worse things than being feared by the place you were trying to keep from ripping itself apart. The next full moon, the valley felt like an enormous held breath. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, the moon swollen and white as bone. Eli stood at the edge of the yard, the stone wall cool against his back, shade sitting pressed against his knee. He listened. The first howl rose from far off, down near the old mining tunnels. It sounded less broken this time. Still grieving, always grieving, but steadier, less desperate. The answering howl came from higher up the ridge, cutting through the first like a blade sliding into a sheet sword. Final, inevitable. Eli closed his eyes. Something moved in the trees below him, not close enough to see, close enough to feel. A presence tracing the same line he walked each night, but deeper, closer to the roots. Not threatening, checking, patrolling, for a moment. He had the uncanny impression that he and the unseen thing were walking parallel circuits around the valley. 2 sentries bound to the same haunted piece of land. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A man, a monster, and the dark between them, keeping watch over a place that would never thank them. He opened his eyes. The moon stared back, heavy and unblinking. Locals would say it never glowed the same after that season, but there was a thinness to it now, a sharpness at the edges like it had been scraped by claws. They'd say the valley felt watched not just by whatever lived in the woods, but by something inside their own stories. They'd lower their voices when talking about the ridges. They'd warn travelers away from the dead-end roads with a little more urgency. Ask the locals about that year. They'll look away before answering. Their minds will go to names not written in the paper, graves not marked by stones, howls not acknowledged out loud. But if you press them, if you catch them late at night when the power flickers and the wind howls through the eaves like an old voice, they might tell you this. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the valley holds its breath, you can hear 3 things if you listen hard enough. A werewolf's howl, full of cursed hunger, a dogman's call, sharp with obligation, and beneath both, quiet and stubborn as a heartbeat, the sound of boots on old ground. Walking the line between house and woods, they'll tell you no one really survives a night it chooses not really. Some walk away, some don't, but the ones who do never walk alone again. Something follows them, in their blood, in their shadow, in the way they flinch at the first howl and hold their breath for the second. If you've ever heard 2 voices in the dark that shouldn't exist in the same story, if you've ever seen 2 sets of tracks where there should only be one, remember this valley. Remember the heart name. Remember the stray that wouldn't leave. Remember the executioner that wasn't evil and the monster that never asked to be made. And remember that the night doesn't always want you dead. Sometimes it wants you watching. Sometimes it wants you working. Sometimes it wants you standing on a cracked porch under a tired moon, listening for the next time the howls don't match. Because when that happens where you live, it won't matter what anyone told you about wolves and bears and big cats. The forest will already know your name, and the dark will already have chosen its witnesses. If you're still here, then the night hasn't quite released you. Stories like this don't fade when the telling ends. They settle in the quiet corners of your home, follow you down dark hallways, and wait for the next moon to climb the sky if any part of this tale sounded like something you've heard. A howl that didn't match, tracks that didn't make sense, a shadow that moved like it remembered you. Leave a word below. Someone else may need your warning before the night turns. This is Whispering Narratives, where the dark still speaks, where old stories breathe, and where the moon remembers every name it ever took. Stay close to the fire. Walk carefully between the trees, and whatever follows you back from this story, don't let it catch you alone. Subscribe before the next full moon. It's safer that way.